In this video, I'll look at the basic rig controls for the Antibot here in 3dsMax. To start out, he's got four basic controls. There's a control master, there's an eyebrow control, an eye, and a mouth. The character itself is frozen, and a lot of the rig is hidden, so all you have to worry about are these four objects. For basic position, rotation, and scale, pick the control master, press W for move as an example, and move it around. Everything is linked to it, including the hidden rig components, so you just put the character where you want. The same goes for rotation, and we can see that the eye and eyebrow controls and mouth maintain the same position around as we rotate. Finally, for scaling, press R, and I'm going to use the squash and stretch in this case to squish the character. I'll click and drag on the Z and he squishes down. Notice that I've uninherited the controls from scaling, so they always maintain their same size even if the character squishes. This allows us to get anticipation and bounce, or squish, if we need. I've added on to the custom attributes on the attribute holder on the control master, roll, so that while the character is rolled over and looking somewhere, we have 45 degrees of motion on any axis to add to it, and have this keyed on a different attribute for separate motion. As an example, we can treat this essentially like an animation layer, you can think of it. He's got a basic rotation and then a roll within that. That way, if he needs to roll over somewhere to look and then accent that motion, quizzically looking to the side, it's available without that motion compounding. Once we're ready to add a motion in, there's three basic controls: eyebrow, eye, and mouth. To start with on his eye, I'll select it and zoom in so we can see it a little better. His eye has four sliders, and these default to roughly a third for the upper and lower lids and all the way down for the in, out, and twist. His lid controls allow upper and lower lids independently. If you'd like to animate a blink, animate both at once. These start out almost all the way withdrawn and can go all the way down. We can also take the lower lid and bring it all the way up or most of the way down. The default for these, again, should be roughly around a third, so he's got kind of a neutral state going on. We can go wider for surprised or down as part of a squint or frown if we need. His eye in and out control allows the eye to come forward just a little, as if he's looking in close. As I pull this control up, we can see the eye morphs into place just a little more. The eye screws go with it, as does the fan, and the eye bulges out just a little bit, which allows a pupilless character to look forward at an object. There's also an eye twist, and this allows the red eye fan to twist just a little bit, somewhat like a camera lens or approximating the twisting motion of the lens in the aperture. Again, this can allow a focusing in combination with, say, a squint to really look at something particular. His eyebrow is controlled through one bone, and I'll get to that in a minute. There's three controls on the attribute holder on the top brow: a middle, a left, and a right. When we scrub the middle up and down, we've got surprised and the start of a down brow for a frown. This control defaults to about the third, as do the right and the left. For the right and the left, they're meant to be asymmetric, and again, they default without snapping to about a third, so he's got an expressive expression to start. With this, we can approximate all sorts of emotions: a little bit of surprise and a little bit of a brow raise, so he's sort of excited, but asymmetric and not twinning. The mouth is the same. I've set the controls up as spinners, and we can change that if needed, depending on your preference for animating. We can see a motion test on these particular items. As I scrub forward on the timeline, his mouth parts animate to be able to check the skinning, and this is a common practice when skinning an object versus moving or rotating and undoing. In this case, mouth open drives a morph target and allows that mouth to open up slightly. There's 100% open. He doesn't have dentures or a mouth bag, and so we don't want to open up to just a void, or actually the inside polygons, too much. I'll right-click on it to reset. The right, left, and middle controls default to 50% and can be used to approximate a smile or a frown. As an example, I'll pull the middle up and then push the ends around. He's definitely unhappy with something, and his mouth is asymmetric, really giving it some character. If we add in a little bit of a mouth open, he's a little perplexed at what's going on. I'll put these back to 50, and then I'll go and look at the rig controls here. These are really simple controls, but they give you a lot of possibilities for expressive animation. To show his rig controls, if you'd like to customize them further, go to your Layer Manager, and there's those layers: Character Geometry, Rig Controls, and Rig Hidden. The character is frozen, and the rig controls are hidden so that all you're dealing with are the initial 4 controls. For the rig, what I've done is to use the mesh lines of the character to generate splines. These in turn become paths for path-constrained point helpers that are actually part of a spline IK control on his eyebrow and mouth bones. In this case, for the spline IK control, it's generated with no linking, so each knot rides independently. They're then path-constrained on the paths which ride on the surface of the character. So when his brow goes up and down, that curve stays on the curve of his forehead. The attributes on the control objects are simply wired to the percentage of the path constraint, allowing this slider to drive this control knot up and down on his forehead. For controls involving a morph, the control, either a slider or a spinner, is wired directly to the percentage of a morph target in a morph modifier on that geometry. Again, so you don't have to go digging for the morpher and only have to use the controls. If you're finding you need more expressive animation, you need a greater pose or more extreme, you can always add to these splines, making sure the first vertex is at the bottom. That'll drive this mesh higher up. It's skinned really to 3 bones: a mouth bone, an eyebrow bone, and a dummy in the middle. This dummy is a head bone. We can see it as a green box here. And everything in the mesh, including the ears and eyelids, is parented to it. That bone is then parented to the master control, so everything rotates in unison. If you'd like to edit any of the sliders or spinners used for the controls, such as the mouth for example, we can go in by selecting that object and choose Animation and Parameter Editor, or press Alt-1. In the Parameter Editor, choose Edit Delete, and there's the controls as an example for the mouth. There's mouth open, right and left, and middle. For any of these, you can switch from a spinner to a slider, rename if needed, or increase the range of the defaults. You can also reposition and add ticks on if you'd like. If you'd like to add another control, simply add one in and wire it to something else. For the character geometry, if you'd like to add more morph shapes, we can select the outer shell. And we can see on here the original editable poly has had a welder applied to smooth out some geometry, a morpher, skin, and turbo smooth. This way we're skinning a low-res mesh. His morpher has states that are created by modeling. What I've done typically on this is to add on below the morpher and skin an edit poly, and this allows a modeling of that object. I'll press E for edit poly and put it on. Now I'll right-click, for example, and choose Vertex, and move a vertex. We'll take these and simply pull them out. He's going to have a bump. Finally, on top of the Edit Poly, I'll add a Poly Select to return to the whole object, and in the Morpher, scroll down, pick a new state that's empty, and choose Capture Current State. There are no separate morph models for this, as all of these have been done with capturing a current state of a model. I'll capture it, and just leave it as captured for now. Then I'll delete the Edit Poly, clicking Yes on the hold state, and delete the Poly Select. Now the morpher has another slot called Captured, and scrolling that back and forth gives me a bump on the side of his head. I'll right-click and delete this one, and we're back to the original. I've wired in, then, the controls to the morphers here, and through multiple objects like the fan and the bolts. That's it for the rig. It's a pretty simple control with stuff hidden. That way all the gymnastics in the rig go on without us having to get to too many objects. So get in there, use these controls, add to them if you'd like, and start making some expressive animation.